Hi, Health 430 students. This is a brief overview of your paper. We discussed it in class, so it will not be in as much detail as class, but just some key points. So as you know, this is the POI paper. It does not require as much critical thinking as the other papers, but it takes time to do. You're going to submit 2 documents. Sometimes people submit 3, and we'll talk about why. The first document is your paper with a title page as required by APA. The second document is your reference list, and the third document could either be a separate document or it could be at the end of your paper, and that's your appendices or appendix or attachments. In class, we talked about some things that might be, so go back to your notes to see what might be an appendix. I have page limits here. These are estimates of what it's going to take so that you do not write too much. The first thing is an introduction to your paper, and at the end of your paper, you'll have a summary of your paper. These are required headings in your paper. So in the summary, you should talk about planning, organizing, and implementing to some extent, possibly the importance of it, and then you should introduce the paper by identifying the headings of the paper. Do not say, I will now discuss these things, or do not say, the paper will now. If you're having a hard time doing that, write it out like that, but you need to eliminate, I will do this, or the paper will do this, and put something else in the beginning of this sentence. Again, we talked about some ideas in class. After you introduce your paper, the first part is planning. This should be no longer than 3 pages, and in reality, it could probably be fewer than 3 pages. You're going to write it either as a narrative or as a chart, and we'll look at both ways. So the first part is planning and health education, and you should talk about the correct way to plan based on a model or theory that you either know or that we went over in class. There's lots of models and theories beginning in lesson 1, beginning in unit 1 all the way through to unit 3. There's models in your books, and you also have other access to models that our information is in Blackboard. So what does this model say is the correct way to plan? That'll be a half to 1 page, but it'll be about a paragraph if you do a narrative. Your planning, explain what your group actually did. That would be no more than a page. And critique of planning, did your group do it correctly? What happened? If you did it incorrectly, how would you fix it? And so you'll either write that as a narrative or you can put it in a chart. So I just chose to do 1 phase of precede proceed. So if you did it in a chart, here it is. The phase is social assessment. The model says that you should create goals based on the quality of life, and you need to identify the needs and wants of the community. Explain what your group did, and then compare the 2 columns to state whether it was completed correctly. Again, either narrative or chart, not both. And then at the end of this section, you'll have 1 to 2 paragraphs that explain what you would do to replicate success and what you would do to avoid issues that you had that you did not do correctly. Part 2 is strategies for teamwork. This should be no longer than 4 pages. It tends to be longer if you do a chart than if you do narrative. This part you can do as a narrative or a chart also. You're going to identify 6 to 8 strategies we use to design to make the team planning process better. I gave you an example. This is an example to show you what it would look like in narrative. And then I use the same example in a chart. Again, you may choose either narrative or chart, but do not do both. Feel free to read over the example. You may not use this strategy in your paper because I'm giving it to you as an example. Part 3 is implementation. This should be a narrative, or it's best written as a list. It says, what were the 5 most critical elements in implementing your program? You'll list 5 elements with a sentence next to each one explaining what it is that you did and why it was critical. 1 or 2 sentences per item. So list the item, 1 to 2 sentences explaining why it's important. Then you will have how your group planned to address diverse learners with your activity. That'll be 1 to 2 paragraphs, or it will be a list. And if your group did not address this, then you need to write that and say how you would fix it. Part 4 is problems and analysis, and you're either going to address problems related to your planning, or you'll indicate things were perfect, or you could have a combination. So you might have 3 things that were great and 1 thing that was a problem. You could have 2 problems, 2 things that were not a problem. And so we'll talk about how to do that. You need 3 to 5 problems that happened. You need to explain why they occurred, how you could fix them in the future. So it says you could if there was a problem, you need to identify 3 to 5, why they occurred, how you could fix them. If you say something was perfect, you need to identify what was perfect and why it was perfect, and explain how you would replicate it. Throughout this paper, I am looking for this. Can you identify what went wrong and how to make it not go wrong at your next event? And can you identify what went well and you know how to replicate it for your next event? That is the overall concept of this paper. If you turn in a second document, you will turn in a second document. It's a reference list. I will not read more than 12 pages. So if you have 15 pages, I just won't read the end of your paper. Your title page is not in that, and your attachments or appendices will either be part of your paper or it will be a third document. Again, this is not a hard paper. Please reach out if you have questions. I look forward to reading them. I will start reading them on Monday, the 18th.